What up, though? Native American Guardians Association, NAGA, mulatto, and the American Indian. Words and definitions are being redefined almost daily to fit a political agenda. The word mulatto is such a word. The definition in today's world describes it as a person of white and black heritage. Although this is true to a point, it is historically false in that it is an oversimplification. From the earliest U.S. census, the term mulatto or free people of color was used to describe individuals of mixed race, which included mixed blood American Indians who were subject to tax laws and the U.S. government, colonial and antebellum eras. Historically, in the American South, the term mulatto was also applied to persons with mixed Native American and African American ancestry. Mixed Native American, which are foreigners, and African American ancestry, which is a non existent group. For example, a 1705 Virginia statute reads as follows: and for clearing all manner of doubts which hereafter may happen to arise upon the construction of this act, or any other act, theater, who shall be accounted a mulatto, be it enacted and declared, and it is hereby enacted and declared that the child of an Indian and the child, grandchild, or great grandchild of a Negro shall be deemed, accounted, held, and taken to be a mulatto. Now, we know an Indian is what the people of this soil called America have been called ever since foreigners start arriving at our shores, or however they got here. And we know Negro is a term that was applied to Indians that were possibly a little darker brown, that is. Let's shake it. This classification continued into the 20th century, but it has become a weapon for progressives in their agenda-driven pursuit in recent years. One of the hardest hit communities is that of the American Indian or Negro or nigger. The federal government requires 1/4 specific Indian blood to be recognized as such for tribal enrollment. This has nothing to do with anyone who does not want to be enrolled in a tribe that they don't share a bloodline with. Or in other words, strangers. We see tribes rejecting legitimate members over personal opinions or vendettas. That is because they are connected and ruled by federal agencies. We see tribes rejecting legitimate members over personal opinions or vendettas, even when providing proof of a quarter or better tribal blood. But we also see newfound Indian communities accepting members with as little as 256th blood degree or less. I assume 256, they're speaking of your, I don't know, what is it, your fifth or sixth great grandparents? Don't quote me. Blood degrees or less through mere statements of correcting lineal descendants to a name on an 1890, 1930, or 1950 census roll, regardless of blood quantum. This helps boost their tribal numbers for federal dollars. Along with this relatively new standard for tribal membership, individuals with less than 1% newly found American Indian blood have been given a voice, where individuals with as much as 50% American Indian blood have none. That's because they keep getting American Indian confused with the Native American foreigner. By the late 1830s, the tribes east of the Mississippi had moved west of the Mississippi. Some, and just from my understanding, it's a small amount, leaving many tribal members behind. As these members integrated into American society, or United States society, remember, America is the soil. They did not forfeit their Indian blood, but they had no recognized tribal status. And this also got something to do with when a foreigner comes here. For an example, if they come here and they are, let's just say, German, after a while, they become a German American. This is the same concept where you no longer exist. As these members integrated into United States society, they did not forfeit their Indian blood, but they had no recognized tribal status. For the U.S. federal census, they became mulatto, parentheses, free person of color. Between 1790 and 1870, the majority of mulattoes might be considered mixed blood of American Indian heritage. Mulattoes were classified as free people of color, while the majority of African Americans at the time were classified as slaves. Mulattoes were classified as free people of color, while the majority of African Americans at the time were classified as slaves. African Americans didn't exist. There was nothing called African Americans at that time, 1870. So who are they speaking of? And as far as slave goes, the United States system came in and labeled the male of the household as the head of the household. And anyone who lived in the household with him, his wife, his children, the children that were roughly 15 or 16 years old and above, as well as his wife, were considered his slaves because he was the head of the household. Therefore, they were considered dependents. Just like you are when you do your taxes, you have dependents. By 1870, after the Civil War, these African Americans, again, no such thing as African Americans. So who are they speaking of? They are speaking of what? Mulattoes, free people of color, American Indians. Definitely not Native Americans, definitely not foreigners, but by calling you an African American, it turns you into a foreigner. After the Civil War, these African Americans became free people of color, or mulattoes, like they say up top, or American Indians, which expanded the number of those classified as mulatto by hundreds of thousands. Using the 1860 U.S. federal census records of Minnesota, we can clearly show this to be a fact. Joseph R. Brown was an Indian agent married to a full-blood Sioux woman. He is listed as white. I'm pretty sure he was a Caucasian, a pink or gray person, a foreigner. Another issue that contributes to the confusion, it's a ton of confusion, so we need some help at this point. Another issue that contributes to the confusion, we do not need another issue that contributes to this confusion, is that during the 1880s and 90s on reservations, tribal members were all but required to take white names for government tracking purposes. When they say white names, this is very confusing. So they were correct saying that this is something that will contribute to the confusion, because what are white names? Question mark. What are white names? Think about it. If the majority of the Europeans or Caucasians came here during the 1800s, they came from various places. Italy, Germany, most Germany and Italy, and a bunch of other places. They all spoke their native tongue from where they were from, right? Right? So the Native Americans were forced to take German names, hard to pronounce names, or the names that these indentured servants slash slaves slash workers, laborers were given, that the Native Americans take those names that those people were given at Ellis Island, perhaps, which are names that were taken from the people who were here. I mean, when they were checking these people in, I would almost guarantee that the people who were checking them in weren't fluent in 10 different languages. Let's shake it. With the 1924 American Indian Citizen Act, the government calculated that roughly 300,000 American Indians were living in the U.S. Of that number, there were 175,000 self-identified but not enrolled members of any tribe. Of the 125,000 tribally enrolled members, the act brought them in for counting on the federal census and protection by federal laws, which had not existed until then. The American Indian birthright citizenship issue wouldn't be settled until 1924, when the Indian Citizenship Act conferred citizenship on all American Indians. At the time, 125,000 of an estimated population of 300,000 American Indians weren't citizens. We can justifiably assume that those numbers to be as low as much mixed blood had been listed as we can justifiably assume those numbers to be low as much mixed blood had been listed as white or mulatto. By the time of the fourth and fifth generations, these individuals no longer even knew they had Indian blood. We can see that from looking at their chiefs, the five civilized tribes, and also many of the Native Americans that we might see in media today. Looking at the DNA conclusions on indigenous people, most professionals agree this term refers to those of America's North, Central, and South America because separating them is all but impossible. By using the word indigenous, an individual who connects to the southern tip of Argentina can now speak for the North American Indians, while at the same time denying actual North American Indians who actually know their heritage, like you. So it says, with the 1924 American Indian Citizenship Act, the government calculated that roughly 300,000 American Indians were living in the United States. Of that number, there were 175,000 self-identified but not enrolled members of any tribe. Of the 125,000 tribally enrolled members, the act brought them in for counting on the federal census and protection by federal laws, which had not existed until then. And we know what protection means. It means I'm your daddy. I'm your God. I will feed you, clothe you, give you a phone, give you some paper. Let's cut to, let's do a sidebar for a second and just see what was happening in 1924. Let's see what was happening in 1924. But first, let's go over this. As we have clearly shown, prior to 1870, the vast majority of mulattoes in the U.S. were American Indians. Prior to 1870, the vast majority of mulattoes in the U.S. were American Indians. I know who my family is, and I know who they were. And entire households and extended family of mine were considered mulattoes before 1870. This classification continued until 1930. It's not clear just when the definition of mulatto changed to fit a political agenda. We can assume it took place around 1973 when the APA changed its long-held standard from scientific research and data collection to a strictly ideological focus. Incidentally, the definition of redskins also changed along with this same time frame. Again, we were speaking of 1924 American Indian Citizen Act, how the government calculated that roughly 300,000 American Indians were living in the United States. Of that number, there were 175,000 self-identified but not enrolled members of any tribe. So let's do a sidebar and see what was happening in 1924 to get an idea of what was happening while that was going on. Black History Timeline, 1920 through 1929. This is from thoughtco.com by Femi Lewis. 1920, January 16th, Zeta Phi Beta, a black sorority. Now, listen, you're going to hear the word black possibly African American, and this is 1920. So I think we've already established that there's no such thing as a black, and there's no such thing as an African American. Remember, we were speaking of American Indians, mulattoes as people of color. Let's shake it. 1920, January 16th, Zeta Phi Beta, a black sorority, is founded at Howard University in Washington, D.C. Howard University, Zeta Phi Beta, black sorority, Washington, D.C., 1920. Talking about a culture vulture. The new Negro movement of the 1920s. The new Negro movement of the 1920s. The NAACP is highly active during this time in lobbying for the right to vote. Same thing they do today. You know why? I'll take a guess. Because if you don't support these people, they gotta go. I'm ready for them to go. The Zeta Phi Beta expands in spite of racial tensions and becomes the first sorority to charter a chapter in Africa. The Zeta Phi Beta expands in spite of racial tensions and becomes the first sorority to charter a chapter in Africa. Always racial tensions, always making that a focal point of yours. Right? Keep you subjugated. And then, look, the first sorority to charter a chapter in Africa. They gotta make the connection. The connection has to be made. It has to be put into the psyche. National Baseball League is founded by Andrew Bishop, Rube Foster, 1879 to 1930. 8 teams are part of the league. The Chicago Giants, Chicago American Giants, the St. Louis Giants, the Indianapolis ABCs, the Dayton Marcos, the Kansas City Monarchs, the Detroit Stars, and the Cuban Stars. This league provides an opportunity for black players. Remember, no such thing as black. We're talking mulatto as people of color or American Indian, right? Opportunity for black players to compete professionally. An opportunity not granted them by the white-owned and operated major leagues. Why would they need the white-owned and operated major leagues? See, this the rub. It's how they get that supremacy kind of mentality in you, woven into your fabric. An opportunity not granted them by the white-owned. Why? Why would we need an opportunity granted to us by anyone? Being that we are the people of the soil. I mean, they learned how to play from us, right? Yeah. 1921, remember, we checking out what happened in 1924, so 1921 is close. Just basically the 1920s, just to see what was going on. What was the temperature of what we term as North America. The Americas, North America, specifically, not Canada, not Mexico, not Central America, not South America, not the islands, but what we term as North America, 1921, the first exhibition of Black American artists. No such thing as black, so let's American artists is held at the 135th Street branch of the New York Public Library. Check that out one more time. The first exhibition of Black American artists, 1921. I'm telling you, the majority of Caucasians, no matter what part of Afro-Eurasia they're from, remember, the majority of them came in the late 1800s, roughly. So in 1920, they was thirsty, begging for a popsicle. But you think they were all the king's men. January 3rd, Jesse Binga establishes 1856 to 1950. I believe this is 1920s, right? 1921. Jesse Binga establishes Binga State Bank in Chicago. The banking institution is the largest Black-owned, largest American-owned bank in the United States, and it employs Black Americans, properly Americans. This is from, we're still on our side note, in the 1920s, 1921, 22, 24. This is from history, 1921 Tulsa Race Massacre. I'm just referencing this because it's supposedly happening around that time. During the Tulsa Race Massacre, which occurred over 18 hours from May 31st to June 1st, 1921, a white mob attacked residents, homes, and businesses in the Black Greenwood neighborhood of Tulsa, Oklahoma. They want you to believe that your people allowed this. Hundreds of people were killed and thousands left homeless. By 1921, fueled by oil money, Tulsa was a growing, prosperous city with a population of more than 100,000 people, but crime rates were high and vigilante justice of all kinds wasn't uncommon. It is not vigilante justice. If you did something wrong, you had to pay the price. Families got together and they'll have you thinking that it was a problem. I'm pretty sure it wasn't a problem. I'm pretty sure the sheriff of this place knew all the people, went to school with him, knew their family, they knew his. Most of the city's Black residents lived in a neighborhood called Greenwood, which included a thriving business district, sometimes referred to as the Black Wall Street, or shall I say, one of the many so-called Black Wall Streets. Okay. This is what we're told. On May 30th, 1921, a young Black teenager named Dick Rowland entered an elevator at the Drexel Building, an office building on South Main Street. At some point after that, the young white elevator operator, Sarah Page, screamed. Rowland fled the scene. The police were called, and the next morning they arrested Rowland. By that time, rumors of what supposedly happened on the elevator had circulated through the city's white community. A front-page story in the Tulsa Tribune that afternoon reported that police had arrested Rowland for sexually assaulting Page. As evening fell, an angry white mob was gathering outside the courthouse, demanding the sheriff hand over Rowland. Sheriff Willard McCullough refused, and his men barricaded the top floor to protect the Black teenager. Now, no such thing as a black. So the teenager was an American. More American than any of the so-called whites. They just say whites, which didn't exist. These were Caucasians. These were immigrants, foreigners. Around 9 p.m., a group of about 25 armed black men, or properly American men, including many World War I veterans, went to the courthouse to offer help guarding Rowland. After the sheriff turned them away, some of the white mob tried unsuccessfully to break into the National Guard armory nearby. Unsuccessfully. With rumors still flying of a possible lynching, a group of around 75 armed black men, properly American men, returned to the courthouse shortly after 10 p.m., where they were met by some 1,500 Caucasians, immigrants, foreigners, some of whom also carried weapons. But there were 75 armed niggas. After shots were fired and chaos broke out, the outnumbered group of black men retreated. The outnumbered group of American men retreated to Greenwood. Over the next several hours, groups of white Tulsans, some of whom were deputized and given weapons by city officials, committed numerous acts of violence against black people, against American people, including shooting an unarmed man in a movie theater. The false belief that a large-scale insurrection among American Tulsans was underway, including reinforcements from nearby towns and cities with large African-American populations, properly American populations. See how they did that interchangeably? African-American, black, two non-existent things, fueled the growing hysteria. Brothers was coming from other areas to get involved. I wonder who made the call. As dawn broke on June 1st, thousands of white citizens, thousands of immigrants, thousands of foreigners poured into the Greenwood district, looting and burning homes. This is what we're told. You dig deeper. For the purposes of this show, I didn't dig deeper than this because it's not really significant in what I'm doing. I'm just showing this is 1920. We're talking about the 1920s here. Thousands of white citizens, thousands of immigrants, foreigners, poured into the Greenwood district, looting and burning homes and businesses over an area of 35 blocks. Firefighters who arrived to help put out fires later testified that rioters had threatened them with guns and forced them to leave. Rioters. Was they masked up? They had a ski mask on? According to a later Red Cross estimate, some 1,256 houses were burned, 215 others were looted but not torched. 2 newspapers, a school, a library, a hospital, church. 2 newspapers, a school, a library, a hospital, churches, hotels, stores, and many other American-owned businesses were among the buildings destroyed or damaged by fire. By the time the National Guard arrived and Governor J.B.A. Robertson had declared martial law shortly before noon, the riot had effectively ended. Though guardsmen helped put out the fires, they also imprisoned many black Tulsans, many Americans. And by June 2nd, some 6,000 people were under armed guard at the local fairgrounds. In the hours after the Tulsa Race Massacre, all charges against Dick Rowland were dropped. In the hours after the Tulsa Race Massacre, all charges against Dick Rowland were dropped. The police concluded that Rowland had most likely stumbled into Paige or stepped on her foot. Why did they have cameras in the elevator? Remember, there was an elevator in 1920. There was an elevator. Was there a camera on the elevator? It said the police concluded that Rowland had most likely stumbled into Paige or stepped on her foot. So she is the one who could have possibly told them that he stumbled into her or stepped on her foot. Well, then if that's the case, then the riot didn't have anything to do with Dick Rowland or Paige. This is from Miller Center. U.S. Presidents Calvin Coolidge. U.S. President, May 26, 1924. New immigration law. Congress passes a new immigration law with even more restrictive quotas than those established by a temporary act 2 years earlier. Japanese immigrants are barred completely while Canadians and Mexicans remain exempted from the quotas. November 4th, 1924, Coolidge elected. This is from the Smithsonian. The 1924 law that slammed the door on immigrants and the politicians who pushed it back open. Decades of xenophobic policy were overturned, setting the United States on the path to the diversity seen today. Anna Diamond, May 2020. This is 1924. America of the melting pot comes to end, the New York Times headline blared in the late April 1924. The opinion piece that followed, penned by Senator David Reed of Pennsylvania, claimed recent immigrants from Southern and Eastern European countries had failed to satisfactorily assimilate and championed his recently passed legislation to severely restrict immigration to the United States. He proudly proclaimed, "The racial composition of America at the present time thus is made permanent." The 1924 Johnson-Reed Act, which Congress had overwhelmingly passed just weeks before and which President Coolidge would sign into law the following month, marked the start of a dark chapter in the nation's immigration history. It drastically cut the total number of immigrants allowed in each year and effectively cut off all immigration from Asia. How could they do that? With Europe, Asia, and Africa all being one landmass, it made permanent strict quotas defined as 2% of the total number of people of each nationality in the United States as of the 1890 National Census, in order to favor immigrants from the Northern and Western Europe and preserve the homogeneity of the nation. The new system also required immigrants to apply for and receive visas before arriving and established the U.S. Border Patrol, which today is ineffective. The restrictions imposed by the law sparked a prolonged fight to reverse them, driven by politicians who decried the law's xenophobia and by presidents who worried about the foreign policy consequences of such exclusions. In her new book, One Mighty and Irresistible Tide, The Epic Struggle Over American Immigration, 1924 to 1965, journalist Jia Lin Yang got something to say. A deputy national editor at the New York Times detailed the drive to implement and sustain the 1924 legislation and the intense campaign to reverse it, a battle that culminated in the Immigration and Naturalization Act of 1965. That law eliminated the quotas, increased the number of visas issued each year, prioritized immigration for skilled workers, and instituted a policy of family unification. Before the act, there were these similar attempts to restrict there were these smaller attempts to restrict immigration. The most important was the 1882 Chinese Exclusion Act, which was quite a bold law that singled out for the first time an ethnic group for restriction. Amazing how some still hold on to the Middle Passage fable, the transatlantic, West Africa fable. When it seems like these people were doing everything they could to not let people in here, to not let more like themselves on this soil. Why? Starting in the 1880s, you have this historic wave of immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, Jews, Italians. Starting in the late 1880s, you have this historic wave of immigrants coming from Southern and Eastern Europe, Jews, Italians. Lawmakers are continually trying to kind of stem that wave. And really, it's not until 1924 that they truly succeed, because everything else they've tried, such as literacy test, either gets vetoed by a president or doesn't really work. (1924) is really a watershed moment. Once you add a whole visa process, once you add these strict quotas, you're just in a whole different regime of immigration. The system really just changes forever. And it's a moment when the country, I think, symbolically says, we're not going to do things like this anymore. You can't just show up. Emanuel Manny Seller was chair of the House Judiciary Committee for many, many years. Right when he became a congressman in 1923, he sees the quotas passed and is horrified because he himself is from a German Jewish family and he represents a district in Brooklyn, that is basically all immigrants from Europe. He basically spends the next 40 years trying to get rid of the quotas. He sees during World War II how the quotas make it impossible to admit Jewish refugees. After the war, he's still fighting and fighting and fighting, constantly losing. He's sort of the rare person who is in there to see the victory, but not everybody does. Very interesting how all the foreigners here today, whether they've been here since the 1920s or the 1880s or what have you, it's interesting how some are so frustrated with the original Americans. The original Americans, us, we cause all sorts of problems. Many of you have seen where it's an issue if you're walking through a neighborhood that's made up of predominantly foreigners, how these foreigners are now tasked with enforcing their laws on you. It's interesting how they look at you. Some, not all. I've heard a few. The narrative is put out where you're lazy. You won't do this job, so we'll get someone else who will. You ain't doing nothing. Well, think about this. If all your needs are met, if you are self-sufficient, why would you need to be doing something? Because when you're self-sufficient, you're not rushing the food to grow. It does that on its own. When you've already established your water source, you don't have to establish it anymore. When you make your own clothes, you have clothes. When you've harnessed electricity, you have light. When you've built a fire, you have heat. When you know how to fish, you got catfish. So why would you need to be doing anything? It seems as though a lot of these people, and it's a lot of them right now, I can't even lie, more than I can count, and they still coming right now. They on the way right now. Right damn now. So it don't look like they're going to be going nowhere. But it seems like the minute they cross them imaginary lines, them imaginary borders, they forget who the American is. Congressman in 1923, he sees the quotas pass and is horrified because he himself is from a German Jewish family, and he represents the district in Brooklyn that is basically all immigrants from Europe. He basically spends the next 40 years trying to get rid of the quotas. He sees during World War II how the quotas make it impossible to admit Jewish refugees. After the war, he's still fighting and fighting and fighting, constantly losing. He's sort of the rare person who is in there to see the victory, but not everybody else does. I'm thinking of Herbert Lehman. He is from the famous Lehman Brothers family and comes from a huge amount of money from New York. He was the first Jewish governor of New York, and he was kind of a right-hand man to FDR. He spends much of his Senate career in the 50s fighting for immigration reform. Celebrating America as a nation of immigrants is a surprisingly recent idea. How did that idea develop and play into the 1965 legislation? The story of Kennedy's Nation of Immigration, a book published posthumously in 1964, is sort of instructive with this. He is leaning on and borrowing from the work of immigration historian Oscar Handlin, who wrote this book called The Uprooted, which won a Pulitzer Prize in the early 1950s and was, at one point, assigned to a lot of school children to read. It was basically the seminal text that, for the first time that anyone could point to, celebrated all these immigrants who had come to this country and sort of pointed out the successive waves of people and give them a Pulitzer Prize and make it required reading. And it's all justified now. What made them come? What made them come here? I mean, a few people come visit for the weekend, go kick it, then go home. But they came in waves, not chains. Whereas in the 20s, the argument was keep America American by keeping out immigrants. Ain't that a bitch? Keep America American. So the Europeans just took your whole name. The Europeans just took your whole name. They didn't even put the hyphen on it. They didn't even say European American. They just took your entire identity. They just said, yo, we want to be them. Not they, them. We want to be them. Whereas in the 20s, the argument was keep America American by keeping out immigrants. Now it was, if you're not going to welcome immigrants, you're not going to celebrate all these different waves of immigration, the Jews, the Italians, the Germans. You're just being un-American. Now they're defining your aura. You don't love this part of the American story. This is still a very powerful idea on the left in the Democratic Party. I got into this whole project for very personal reasons. I wanted to understand why my family had been allowed to come to this country from Taiwan and China. I have no idea. Has nothing to do with being allowed to. I'm curious as to why they didn't want to stay home. In retrospect, I feel kind of naive for not having thought about it before. I so bought into this idea of America as a nation of immigrants that I hadn't even really seriously considered a possibility that my parents would have been rejected. America as a nation of immigrants. It's amazing how a soil portion, fully populated, thriving, sun-drenched, forested woods, the people looking like the trees, hair standing up like the leaves, and they pick one soil portion and call it a nation of immigrants. And what did the immigrants do? Did the immigrants ponder, with their philosophy and shit? Did the immigrants ponder and say, how was it a nation of immigrants when there were the original Americans, when there were the Americans? How can we say this is a nation of immigrants? Moreover, we should probably say that America is the home of the Americans, and today it is a nation of Americans and invaders. Guests who don't want to leave. What was surprising to me was just to learn how easily that could have happened. And not just for me and my family, but every family I know in America. Basically, that's not from Europe. I now wonder who among us would just not be here if not for the 1965 Immigration Nationality Act. And I think it was surprising understanding how hard that fight was to get it. Wow, what is it about you? What is it about you that people, by any means, want to come get next to you? But then when they get next to you, they forget who you is. And then they start getting tired of you. They start smelling their own shit. This is from the Smithsonian. Why the 1924 Democratic National Convention was the longest and most chaotic of its kind in U.S. history. Again, we had taken a sidebar, and we came and kind of diving into what was happening in 1924, the 1920s. Why the 1924 Democratic National Convention was the longest and most chaotic of its kind in U.S. history. And we're looking at 1924, and one of the things that we've seen in the 1920s is the Tulsa, what is termed the Tulsa Massacre. Because for some reason, this new creation, the black, this new creation, the African American, and the propaganda that has crippled so many of us. Well, so many, not me. Well, me for a little while as well. Tends to make you think the only thing that was happening was, on one hand, there was Black Wall Street, and next door, somebody was getting hung, right? So I wanted to kind of go into 1920s just to let you know that your people wasn't punks. I mean, I'm not saying that they was not, don't necessarily got to do with violence. I'm just saying your people wasn't no punk. It amazes me how everybody think they people just laid down for somebody like they wasn't doing nothing. So let's get to it. Why the 1924, something else happening in the 1924 Democratic National Convention was the longest and most chaotic of its kind in U.S. history. Eli Weisvich, reporter, says, I belong to no organized party. The humorist Will Rogers said in 1924, I'm a Democrat. Rogers had just witnessed the longest and, by some accounts, wildest political convention in American history, the 1924 Democratic National Convention, which took 16 days and 103 ballots to nominate a presidential candidate. After all the chaos of the convention, the Democrats lost badly to Coolidge in the 1924 presidential election. The Republican slogan, Coolidge or Chaos, resounded across the country, reminding voters of the troubled state of the Democratic Party. How did it resound around the country in 1924? Television, radio, newspapers. The 1924 DNC has been largely forgotten as the glimmers of hope that squeaked out of Madison Square Garden. Since its founding in 1828, the Democratic Party has been committed to an agrarian vision of American democracy rooted firmly in land ownership, limited government, and conservative social policy. My, how things change. Or have they? Through the Civil War, the Democrats contrasted themselves with the Republicans, the party of Abraham Lincoln, and big government. Listen to this. Listen to that. Wow. You mean to tell me, since its founding, the two have completely switched? Since its founding in 1828, the Democratic Party had been committed to an agrarian vision of American democracy, rooted firmly in land ownership, limited government, and conservative social policy. Through the Civil War, the Democrats contrasted themselves with the Republicans, the party of Abraham Lincoln, and big government. By 1932, however, these positions had started to shift. With Democrats dominated by Franklin D. Roosevelt's New Deal coalition supporting an expanded federal government and socially progressive policies that are more in line with the party's platform today. Waves of immigration from Central and Eastern Europe. More progressive Democrats in the Northeast United States were trying to appeal to this growing working class immigrant population, McVeigh says. Document Bank of Virginia. Virginia Health Bulletin. The new Virginia law to preserve racial integrity, 1924. The Saturday Evening Post. The long, costly road to citizenship for Native Americans. Article 2 said the president must be a citizen. Article 2 said the president must be a citizen. Article 1, Section 2 determined there would be no government representation for Indians not taxed. A phrase whose exact meaning is now lost, but which might have meant Native Americans living in white communities off of tribal lands. Citizenship for members of American Indian tribes wouldn't have occurred to the founders because these Americans were considered members of foreign nations, each with its own citizens and treaties. Citizenship for members of American Indian tribes wouldn't have occurred to the founders because these Americans were considered members of foreign nations, each with its own citizens and treaties. This is where they possibly conflate American Indian with Native Americans. Native Americans were members of foreign nations. They were foreigners. They are foreigners. Anglos, the Caucasians, the Europeans, members of those Native American tribes, are all foreigners. So it makes sense. So it makes sense. It says Article 1, Section 2 determined there would be no government representations for Indians not taxed, a phrase whose exact meaning is now lost, but which might have meant Native Americans. Never mentions Native Americans. It mentions Indians, the people who were here when the foreigners got here, poor and destitute. Just a note. In 1857, American Indian citizenship received unexpected support from the Supreme Court. In Dred Scott versus Sanford, Chief Justice Roger Taney ruled that African Americans, though born in America, did not qualify for citizenship. However, Native Americans, descendants of free and independent people, could become naturalized citizens of the U.S. like any immigrant. And remember, no such thing as an African American. People of color / mulatto / American Indian / Negro. Native Americans found farming alien and difficult, and some of the land was unsuitable for farming. Well, we know from time immemorial that American Indians didn't see farming as alien, but the distinction persists. Native Americans found farming alien and difficult, and some of the land was unsuitable for farming. What land, perhaps? The distributed land? The res? Tribal societies fell apart. Poverty, disease, and hopelessness grew in the reservations. By the early 20th century, American Indians could gain citizenship by only a few avenues: serving in the military, marrying white Americans or white foreigners, Europeans, accepting land allotments like those given in the Dawes Act, or moving off tribal land, paying taxes, and undergoing naturalization. Then came the First World War. All American Indians were ordered to register for military service. Now, what American Indians do you know that were in the First World War and the wars? You would have to do your genealogy and look into your family. Meticulous and very fulfilling. Learning who your people are. All American Indians were ordered to register for military service. You know plenty of your people. I know my people had to register. I have the registration cards. Overall, 25% of American Indians served in World War I. They were among the first U.S. combat units to reach France in 1917 and fought in every critical engagement. The Indian Citizenship Act of 1924 declared all non-citizen Indians born within the territorial limits of the United States be, and they are hereby declared to be citizens of the United States. Yeah, that means you, not these people on this picture right here. a photo op that is reminiscent of Hollywood. The use of the terms Negro and Black to include persons of Native American ancestry in Anglo North America. Jack D. Forbes. In 1854, the California State Supreme Court sought to bar all non Caucasians from equal citizenship and civil rights. The court stated the word black may include all Negroes, but the term Negro does not include all black persons. We are of the opinion that the words white, Negro, mulatto, and black person, whenever they occur in our Constitution, must be taken in their generic sense. That the words black person in the 14th section must be taken as contra distinguished from white and necessarily includes all races other than Caucasian. That was in the 1854, the California State Supreme Court sought to bar all non-Caucasians from equal citizenship and rights. As convoluted as the quote may be, it tends to express a strong tendency in the history of the United States toward creating two broad classes of people, white and non-white, citizen and non-citizen, or semi-citizen. In the British slave colonies of North America along the Atlantic coast, many persons of American ancestry were at times classified as blacks, Negroes, mulattoes, or people of color. The purpose here is to illustrate how the term Negro has also been applied to people of American descent. This is Explorations in Ethnic Studies, Volume 7, Number 2, July 1984. The possibility that Native Americans were quite commonly called Negroes, and we know that Native American is a foreigner. We are talking about American Indians here. The possibility that Native Americans were quite commonly called Negroes is very much supported by Portuguese usage. During the colonial period, Brazilian Indians were repeatedly referred to as Negroes or as Negros de Terra, Negroes of the land. A great many examples from the 16th and later centuries are cited by George Frederici in his analysis of Portuguese sources. These do not have to be repeated here, but suffice to say that it was so common that finally in 1755, a royal decree had to be issued as follows. Among the regrettable practices which have resulted in the disparagement of the Indians, one prime abuse is the unjustifiable and scandalous practice of calling them Negroes. Perhaps by so doing, the intent was no other than to induce in them the belief that by their origins they had been destined to be the slaves of whites. So here it seems that Negro is synonymous with slave or worker, laborer for someone else, as is generally conceded to be the case of blacks from the coast of Africa. The directors will not permit henceforth that anybody may refer to an Indian as a Negro, nor that they themselves may use this epithet among themselves, as is currently the case. These are the so-called Negroes of Brazil, or the Americans, or the Indians of Brazil. This is 1755 royal decree. This goes out to all my Brazilians out there who by default think just because they do the things they do and the way they do them, for some reason, it's associated with Africa. For some, it may be true. But I'm going to guess that the majority just adopted the propaganda. This Portuguese usage is extremely significant, not only because American or part American slaves could be referred to as Negroes in early shipment records. Insofar as the term Negro became synonymous with slave or a servile status, it lost any specific color references and became a general term of abuse, darker people preferring to be called preto. As a result, it is highly likely that the Spaniards also referred to slaves generally as Negroes in the Caribbean, and that the Dutch took over the same general practice, since Negro and Neger were not Dutch words and had no immediate equivalent except zwart, donker, and bruin. You know, the Bruins. What is that? Is that a baseball team? Milwaukee Bruins? Is it Milwaukee Bruins? I feel like looking it up. A Dutch-French-Spanish dictionary of 1639 has the following entry for Spanish: Negro, noir, sombre, obscure, offusque, brun, swart, donker, bruin. Thus, Spanish negro could be translated as dark or brown, as well as black, swart. Undoubtedly, this usage facilitated making references to all slaves as Negroes or Negers. In the Dutch language, moreover, it is significant that a Spaniard residing in Antwerp in the early 17th century, the preparer of the dictionary saw Negro as being translated in a number of ways in both French and Dutch. By the latter half of the 16th century, the English were referring to the people of Africa as Ethiopians, blackamoors, Negroes, and Moors, somewhat interchangeably. By the latter half of the 16th century, the 1500s, the English were referring to the people of Africa as Ethiopians, blackamoors, Negroes, and Moors, somewhat interchangeably. Negro gradually came to be the dominant term, especially after exhaustive contact with the Spanish and the Portuguese. Clearly, because they are right next to each other, if not connected. What is not clear is the extent to which the term Negro was consciously translated as black. In any case, another association gradually arose, and that was between Negro and slave. Early legislation commonly referred to as Negro and other slaves, or to Negro, mulatto, and Indian slaves. Over the years, Negro and black both became synonymous with enslavement. Just so you know, just so everyone knows, listen to me well. None of this made sense, and none of this made any sense. Or let me rephrase that. None of this mattered until foreigners came here. None of this mattered. Imagine that. Imagine that. Everything that matters beyond the idea of self-sufficiency, because I can't say self-sufficiency, because the majority of us are not self-sufficient today. But before foreigners came here, We were. And we all had the same, so it was really no reason to take from one another, which is why you would give a foreigner something that you had because you were used to having it. It didn't mean as much to you. You charged it to the game. You charged it to the dirt. But to the foreigner, they saw something shiny and lost their fucking mind. Just remember how much of the stuff that matters to you today didn't matter before foreigners came here. In 1702, an observer wrote that the wealth of Virginia consisted of slaves or Negroes. In 1702, an observer wrote that the wealth of Virginia consisted of slaves or Negroes. Some might see that as them putting a price tag on a nigger. I don't necessarily see it that way. The wealth of Virginia was in its people. By 1806, Virginia judges ruled that a person who was of a white appearance was to be presumed free. But in the case of persons visibly appearing to be of the slave race, it is incumbent upon him to make out his freedom. In 1819, South Carolina, judges stated flatly the word Negroes has a fixed meaning: slaves. I guess that's why we took on nigger. What the English meant by the term Negro when they first began to use it is not clear. Yeah, because they got it from us. They got nigger from us. And they did the best they could with it. Certainly, it was not then synonymous with slave, as a great many persons so classified were free, both in England and in Virginia. Heard that? Both in England. We're talking about niggers here, right? Or Negroes, both in England and in Virginia. Did it mean an African, a black person, or any dark-skinned individual? Today, the term is not widely employed in Britain, although the word black is used to refer to people of various skin colors. From all of South Asia, the Middle East, the West Indies, and Africa, most Native Americans, if living in Britain today, would be regarded as being black, especially if their ancestry were not known. By Native American, properly, they mean American Indian, or American, or nigger for short. Negro was also used in a general way in the North American colonies. Some examples illustrate the use of Negro and black as applied to people of American ancestry. An example from the West Indies is especially illuminating. In 1764, William Young was sent to St. Vincent as a part of the British occupation of that island. Living on St. Vincent were about 3,000 black Caribs or free Negroes, about 100 red Caribs or Indians, and some 4,000 French and their slaves. According to Young, the British found it difficult to control the Caribs, and wars were fought with them in 1771, 1772, and again during 1795, 1796. During the latter crisis, Young wrote an extremely anti-Carib tract designed to prove that the Caribs should be removed from St. Vincent. They were eventually defeated, and some 5,000 were shipped to an island near the coast of Honduras. Young was anxious to prove that the so-called black Caribs were not true Aborigines, but were in fact Negro colonists, free Negroes, or Negro usurpers. This was important to him because he wanted to show that they had no bona fide land rights or Aboriginal title. Same as you. Same as you. That's why you became African American and a black. For our purposes, the interesting point admitted by Young is that the so-called blacks or Negroes were occasionally of tawny and mixed complexion because of American ancestry, and that their customs, personal names, and language were those of the native Caribs, or they were tawny and mixed complexion not because of American ancestry, but because they were tawny and other shades, right? See, for some reason, y'all think these people, y'all think these foreigners, these Anglos, these Caucasians, Europeans, from the tippity top of Europe to the bottom of South Africa, y'all automatically assume these people smart and intelligent. Y'all think the technology that's happening is smart and intelligent. Y'all think, quote, space exploration is smart and intelligent. Y'all think science is smart and intelligent. Medicine, school, your phone. Being able to type in something and get an answer while not knowing how to do shit. I disagree. I don't think these people smart at all. I just think we were natural, like what we got on our head, and they were not. Still further, Young admitted that they had repeatedly intermarried with American women because they were men from the Americas. Why wouldn't they marry women from the Americas? They make it so complicated in their writings, but I'm not mad at them. It's not their burden to write anything that would please you. He consistently referred to them as Negroes nonetheless. The important point is this, that a people thoroughly American in identity, culture, and language were called Black and Negro. The important point is this, that a people thoroughly American in identity, culture, and language were called Black and Negro. This tendency continues, incidentally, among white scholars who, even today, refuse to accept the Caribs' avowed feelings of Indianness and continue to call them black. And you continue to call yourself black. In 1676, one Gowan, an Indian servant, acquired his freedom in Virginia. 2 decades earlier, Mahill Gowan, called a Negro. Let's rewind that. In 1676, one Gowan, or Gowan, I think it probably is going. He going over there. Or he going over there. They going over there. We finna go over there. An Indian servant acquired his freedom in Virginia. 2 decades earlier, Mahill Gowan called a Negro, also acquired his freedom. It would appear that the Negro was probably father to the Indian in this case. In 1670, the population of the Virginia colony was said to be 40,000, including 2,000 black slaves. Evidence indicates that there could not have been that many Africans there, and also that there were a great many American slaves or servants. You see that? American slaves or servants or workers or employees. Thus, the total of blacks must have included a good many Americans, or possibly all Americans. In 1698, 3 fugitives, Negroes, were reported in North Carolina, of whom one was an American. Similarly, a list of Negroes imported into Virginia 1710 to 1718 by sea includes at least 69 Indians, mostly from the Carolinas. Likewise, list of Negroes brought into New York from 1715 to 1736 include many slaves of probable or stated American ancestry from Campeche, Jamaica, Honduras, the Carolinas, and Virginia. A welcome clarification of terminology was provided in 1719 by the government of South Carolina when it decided, and for preventing all doubts and scruples that may arise what ought to be taxed on musties, mulattoes, etc., all such slaves as are not entirely Indian shall be accounted as Negro. The significance of this act is that all later enumerations of Negro and Indian slaves in South Carolina have to be analyzed with the thought in mind that many Negroes were probably one half or other fractions of American ancestry. In 1734, an advertisement appeared for the recovery of Juan. He is half Indian and half Negro. He plays the fiddle and speaks good English, and his country Indian. Juan, W-A-N, was not specifically called a Negro, but a 1747 advertisement reads, "Runaway on the 20th of September last from Cohansey, a very lusty Negro, fellow named Sampson, aged about 53 years, and had some Indian blood in him. He had with him a boy about 12 or 13 years of age named Sam, was born of an Indian woman, and looks like an Indian, only his hair. They both talk Indian very well." Yeah, like you talk Indian. Yeah, I'm talking Indian right now. "And it is likely they have dressed themselves in the Indian dress and gone to Carolina." Man, I wish they would have had I wish they would have went live while they was going where they was going, so we could have saw what was up with them. You know, Samson and this. Yeah, we could have saw what was up with them, how they was dressed or whatever, what these people call in the advertisement Indian dress. They could have hollered at us so we could have knew what talking Indian sound like. They didn't they didn't say nothing about no Native American. Nothing. They probably had to do everything in their power not to say they both talk niggerish. Similarly, in a 1778 advertisement, 1778, we read, was stolen from her mother, a Negro girl about 9 or 10 years of age named Diana. Her mother's name is Cash. Was married to an Indian named Lewis Wallace, near 6 feet high, about 35 years of age. They have a male child with them, between 3 and 4 years of age. Any person who takes up the said Negroes and Indian shall have the above reward. Was stolen from her mother, a Negro girl about 9 or 10 years of age named Diana. Sheesh. Other persons of American ancestry who were free also were called black or Negro. Virginia tax rolls and census records from 1780s to 1850 have numerous examples of people of Indian tribal identity being classified as free people of color or as mulattoes. In fact, the practice was almost universal. Some were also classified as FN, free Negro, or as B, black, in various records. In certain counties, such as Southampton in 1830, and in parts of Delaware, virtually all free non-whites were categorized as FN. Although enumerated under Free People of Color column, these lists included people of the Nanticoke and other tribal groups. Yeah, hit it right. At this point, it's like, it's not even really a argument or definitely not a debate. The only thing that I would say is that hopefully it's inspiring or inspiration for you to start the journey of tracing your lineage. Especially because it's possible right now. In the 1860s, all persons of African ancestry who had been slaves were granted by treaty citizenship in the 5 civilized tribes of Indian Territory. Think about that. Think about that. Afro-Eurasia. You can go from the top of Europe to the bottom of Africa without crossing a body of water. In the 1860s, all persons of African ancestry who had been slaves were granted by treaty citizenship in the 5 civilized tribes of Indian Territory. So as early as the 1860s, think about today as well. All the way in the 1860s, they were bringing people over here and giving them your stuff. They started early. These punks started early. When lands were allotted in the 1880s to early 1900s, most such persons were not allowed to assert American ancestry and were therefore denied future rights as Indians because they were not. Since many but not all Native Americans were brown or dark colored without African ancestry, again, Native Americans, foreigners, Chinos, Siberians, Anglos. This is referring to American Indians. The Americans were brown or dark colored or tawny, some variation of brown. Look at the people in your family. They all shades. Gotta stop letting these people put you in the category of a color, man. It's either you from the soil or you from a test tube. Or as Copper Empress and her crew say, a petri dish. In North America, were special terms for such persons, such as Zambo. In North America, were such special terms for such persons, such as Zambo. The United States Census also tended to expand the use of the terms black or Negro. In 1890, black was to be used for all persons having 3/4 or more black blood. How did they determine you got black blood? I mean, blood don't even come in the color black, I guess, until it like get old and start getting hard. Then they look at the blood and say, okay, black blood. Let's just be serious. These people not smart, man. They've proven over and over again they're not smart, man. I mean, look at what they do all the way from these people have brought the death culture here. Think about it. Almost everything they do has to do with hurting themselves or creating dis-ease, and then treating that dis-ease with poison. The United States Census in 1890, black was to be used for all persons having 3/4 or more black blood. Ridiculous. In 1910, black was supposed to be applied only to full-blooded Negroes. What the fuck is that? A full-blooded Negro. Where do that come from? That might be that thing they call Bigfoot. You know. While the matter of who was an Indian was left to the enumerator. Yeah, because the Indian was the one that was connected to the soil. So this has to do with, the new term for soil, which is land allotments. Okay. That's what that got to do with. So of course the Negro really don't matter, but the Indian part. The term mulatto was to be used for all other persons having some proportion of perceptible trace of Negro blood. Just to let you know, all this is stupid. All this is fake. All this is an illusion. All this is it's not a distraction. It's so that it's the death culture. It's the opposite of what's natural. It's the opposite of what's natural. Stupid is an understatement. It's ridiculous, disgusting. It's demonic. It is certain that large numbers of Americans or part Americans were classified as Negro or mulatto under these rules. For example, of the Mattaponi, only one person was counted as Indian by the census out of a reservation population at least 40 persons. Similarly, the Poospatuck of Long Island had only one person counted as Indian, doubtless because the rest were enumerated as Negroes or mulattoes. Playing games. It's not a game, it's actually an act of war. In 1930, a person of mixed Indian and Negro blood shall be returned as a Negro unless the Indian blood predominates, and the status as an Indian is generally accepted in his community. Generally accepted. See, interesting word, accepted. None of this should be accepted. None of it should be accepted. And the talking should be over. By 1940, all African American, because it's so stupid. This is dumb. This is dumb. This is a huge waste of time and paper. And this stuff has been mutating over the years into more and more documents and articles and all manner of things to keep you from just doing what comes natural. By 1940, all African American hybrids were to be counted as Negroes. African American hybrids. A hybrid of something that doesn't exist. Unless the Indian ancestry very definitely predominates and he is universally accepted as an Indian. Universally accepted as an Indian by who? What they mean is your U.S. Law accepted as an Indian. Because universally, people seem to know who you are. And some people get really mad. Although some people get really mad when you tell them who you are. Because it's much more beneficial to them for you to not know who you are. Because it's easier for them to say that they are you. Even pure blood Indians, pure blood. See what's happening here? Others are calling you what they want to call you. Others are determining if you are who you are. You know who you are. Your people know who they is. But somebody's gonna come. Not just anybody, though. We're talking people who came here in waves, thirsty, begging for a popsicle. They came and told you who you was and who you is today. It's crazy. It's crazy. It don't get no worse than that. And it's almost so bad that it's funny. The type of funny where it's so funny you don't laugh. You just say it's funny. Even pure blood Indians could be counted as blacks, as in Nevada in 1880 when the census enumerator categorized 90 members of the Duckwater Shoshone tribe in that manner. In the state of Delaware, more recent decades found that if a person said he was an Indian, he was recorded as either black or white depending upon his appearance. Boy, they train them enumerators. The 1980 census was so arranged that any African American mixed blood who checked both black and Indian boxes was counted solely as black. So in other words, they showing you who run it. They blatantly disrespecting you. They showing you who run it. In a few generations, I think the goal is for you not to even exist. Look at the person next to you and say you're an American. That person a pink and gray person, and that person definitely say they're an American. They got the flag on, they patriotic. They got the old camouflage on. Yeah. In summary, it seems clear that many persons of Native American ancestry in whole or part have been at times classified as Negroes or blacks. This is a matter of considerable significance for the scholar seeking to understand the actual ethnic or racial identity of non-white persons in North American British colonies and in the United States over the centuries. North American British colonies. They ain't even hit Alabama, Mississippi, all in places yet. Earlier studies have shown the significance of the term mulatto, musty, sambo, and colored as indicating persons of American ancestry. Earlier studies have shown the significance of the terms mulatto, musty, sambo, or zambo, and colored as indicating persons of American ancestry. From the scholarly perspective, the logic of white racism, which has tended to classify people in very arbitrary ways, is neither the logic of genetics nor of bona fide ethnicity. This is BS. History. This is from history. What was the role of FDR's Black Cabinet, led by Mary McLeod Bethune? This informal network of advisors was the first group to press for civil rights from within the federal government. By Pharrell Evans. During President Franklin D. Roosevelt's administration, an informal network of more than 100 African Americans, remember, no such thing as an African American, government employees formed the Federal Council on Negro Affairs. So it's African American Negro Affairs, more popularly known as the Black Cabinet. So it's from African American, Negro, Black. They worked to lobby the administration for equal rights and opportunities for African Americans. What does this tell you? Yep. These people are Americans. And it's a very good reason why these people are labeled so much. Land allotment. Okay. Other U.S. presidents had occasionally called on outside black leaders for advice on race matters, but parts of the Roosevelt administration had made a concerted effort to hire black federal employees, and this was the first group to organize an effort from inside the government to attack racial discrimination. Leaders of Black Cabinet included numerous notable figures led by educator and activist Mary McLeod Bethune, the first black woman to direct a federal program. Harvard-trained economist Robert Weaver, later the first U.S. Black Cabinet Secretary, began his government career in his 20s as an aide to Roosevelt's Secretary of the Interior. Robert Vann, who trained as a lawyer and published the Pittsburgh Courier, the largest circulation black newspaper in the country. No such thing as black. Remember that. We're talking Americans here. Served as an assistant to FDR's Attorney General. Former National Urban League Director Eugene K. Jones worked as a Negro Affairs advisor to the Commerce Department, and William Hastie, a Harvard-trained civil rights lawyer, served as the assistant solicitor in the Interior Department. See what these people doing? You thought your people was just getting lynched? Jim Crow. Somebody put a label on the time period, and you think you know what everyone is doing in that time period based on what the label means, or based on what propaganda has presented the label to you as. Roosevelt's Black Cabinet gained unprecedented access to the levels of power, says Brett Gadsden, a Northwestern University professor of history who is writing a book about the key black advisors in the Kennedy, Johnson, and Nixon administrations. Their rise marked African Americans' renewed recognition of the power of the presidency and the federal government in their quest for recognition as citizens, deserving of services just like whites. I bet. Formed shortly after Roosevelt was first elected in 1932, the Black Cabinet was led by Bethune, a sister, the founder and president of the Bethune-Cookman University, a Florida-based historically black college, a Florida-based historically American college, 1932. Stop crying about somebody holding you back from doing something or somebody held you back from doing something. Stop letting people make you think or make you believe or think for you and tell you that someone else is supreme over you. It was always you. It has to be you. Nothing works without you. We talking about the 1920s here. We're talking about that time period, 1924. Remember, we did the little sidebar. We're still on that sidebar. It's a long sidebar. Let's stay on these 1920s though. Let's go to some newspaper clippings or from around the country during 1924. Let's just see what's being said in the newspaper, because when you think of 1924, for some reason, you think your people was just like just shuffling along. You know what I mean? Just shackles on the neck and the wrist, downtrodden. You know what I mean? Just like toes sticking out the front of their shoes. For some reason, it seems like people think that. Why? I mean, why wouldn't you think that all manner of things is going on? Just like today. Think about it. For an example, like MLK marches and whatnot. Think about when people march for stuff today. You at the spot. You at the spot eating. Doing whatever you doing. Just like when MLK was marching. Only the people who was marching with him was there. I mean, if they wasn't crisis actors. Let's shake it. This is from the Columbia, Missouri. Wednesday, August 13th, 1924. Died yesterday afternoon. Ned Saunders, Negro, who was injured yesterday morning in a fall from a tree while working at Christian College, died about 4 o'clock yesterday afternoon. Saunders is survived by his wife, Minnie Saunders, 2 sons and 3 daughters. Funeral services will be held at 2:30 o'clock Saturday afternoon at the Broadway Baptist Church. The Reverend T.T. Ward of Sedalia will probably officiate. Dead from injuries received in a fall from a tree while working at Christian College. Ned Saunders. The Macon News, Macon, Georgia, Monday, May 12th, 1924. Henry A. Rucker, a Negro, leader of GOP, dead. By the Associated Press, Atlanta, Georgia, May 12th. Henry A. Rucker, Negro, a Negro, for 13 years, collector of internal revenue for Georgia under 3 Republican administrations, died at his residence here Sunday afternoon. Rucker was appointed collector of internal revenue in 1897 by President McKinley and served under the administrations of McKinley, Roosevelt, and Taft, retiring to private life in 1910. For more than 40 years, he had been a prominent figure in Georgia Republican politics. This is from the Freelance Star, Fredericksburg, Virginia, Tuesday, February 12, 1924. Negro centurion dead. Warrenton, Virginia, February 25th. Peter Forbes, oldest colored man in this section, died on February 22nd. The records are not clear as to his age, but he was well over 100 years old. He was one of the hands who worked on a canal from Waterloo to Fredericksburg when it was built. This canal was not operated after the Civil War. Robert Hudson, Lexington Herald Leader, Lexington, Kentucky newspaper, Thursday, July 10th, 1924. Robert Hudson, Negro, dies at age of 103. We already went over Negro. We already went over African American, Black, Negro. Listen. American. Before any foreigner. Only way anything happens. They was coming over here because something was here. They didn't come over here and bring something here. They didn't come over here and make everything here. They came to a place because it was sensational. Robert Hudson, Negro, dies at age of 103. Robert Hudson, Negro, believed to be the oldest man in central Kentucky, is dead at the county infirmary at the age of 103. He was born near Athens, this county, in 1821 and resided in that section all of his life. Nothing is known of his family or the people he belonged to as a slave. Nothing is known of his family or the people he belonged to as a slave. They're assuming he was a slave. Well, some of my people are from Kentucky. And one in particular, who I'm thinking of right now, was born around 1821. This man, I'm not going to disrespect him. Even though today, when people meet one another, they introduce themselves to one another. They always tell a person their name. And then a lot of times, in corporate type settings, or in like if people are dating or something like that, sometimes people ask, what do you do? And that's what they trying to put on Robert Hudson right here. They trying to call him a slave. They trying to call him an employee. Nah, he was 103, possibly older than that. They say believed to be the oldest man in central Kentucky. That's what he is. He the patriarch of central Kentucky. He was born near Athens, 1821. His death was due to chronic bronchitis after an illness of 2 years, according to the certificate of his death filed with Dennis A. Furlong, Register of Vital Statistics. This is from the Johnson City Staff, Johnson City, Tennessee, the Johnson City Staff newspaper, Johnson City, Tennessee, Monday, March 17th, 1924. Negro centenarian dies. Raleigh, North Carolina, March 17th. Lucrece Ash. Negress. It's a female. Lucrece Ash. Amazing to me, man. Newspapers never really meant anything to me, but looking at these newspapers from 1924, it's like, wow. It's like they paint such a picture. Negro centenarian dies, Raleigh, North Carolina, March 17th. Lucrece Ash, negress, sister, 106 years old, died at the home of her son, Elijah Ash, 72 years old, in Ramcott, this county, late yesterday. Aunt Lucrece was the mother of 9 children, 5 of whom survived her. Other survivors include 27 grandchildren, 17 great-grandchildren, and 2 great-great-grandchildren. The woman was formerly a slave. Here we go. Owned by Thomas H. Ashe of Pender County and uncle of Captain S.A. Ashe, clerk of the United States District Court here. When they say the woman was formerly a slave and owned by Thomas H. Ashe is probably her father. Matter of fact, I'm going to just go out on a limb and say Thomas H. Ashe is her father, from what I've experienced doing genealogical research. Can't stand when they speak about these, I'm sure, remarkable people, and they want to close it off by saying a former slave. And owned by Thomas H. Ashe. We talking about a woman who's 106 years old. And they go all the way to when she was born, talking about she was owned by Thomas H. Ashe. They go to when she was born and they associate her birth, her father, with someone owning her. Because that's the way things were. That's the system that they put in place, was that the man is the head of the household. So everyone else in the house comes under his not only leadership, but ownership. Nashville Banner, Nashville, Tennessee. The Nashville Banner newspaper, Sunday, June 29th, 1924. Negro workman dies from injuries. Ed Randall, Negro workman in the construction of the new Vanderbilt Hospital on 21st Ave South, died late Saturday afternoon at the Vanderbilt Hospital as the result of injuries received when struck by I can't tell what that says. Noon Saturday, struck by a something. Noon Saturday, Randall was crossing the street. I think it says truck. Randall was crossing the street near the new hospital when he was struck by an automobile driven by Zelly Raleigh, employee of the Cayee Coal Company. It was reported at the police station that Ronnie would be arrested on a charge of manslaughter. The Birmingham Post-Herald newspaper, Birmingham, Alabama, Saturday, February 2nd, 1924, Negro dies at 100. Sine Story, Negro, said to be nearly 100 years old, died at his home Tuesday night. Sine for many years was a valued city employee and was honored by numerous friends, both white and Negroes. He was said to have been a slave belonging to the Story estate in the early days, i.e., the Story estate, his family, his father, his mother. These people, man, unbelievable. For more than 40 years, Sine worked for the city as sexton at the cemetery and also at the waterworks and the gas plant. He was connected with the waterworks from the very start, long before the city took it over. Yeah, that's somebody who was a slave, or the Kunta Kinte. But once you know what the word slave means, all it means is that he was basically a dependent in the house of his father. That's it. And all these terms come from foreigners. All these terms come from foreigners. Because there's absolutely no reason why a person would distinguish themselves as head of the household, or dependent, or laborer, or anything like this. When you're taking care of yourself, you're born into what we call this world. A bird is born into this world. A squirrel is born into this world. And what do? They do what they have to do. They use what is around them. Squirrels, what do I see the squirrels doing outside mostly? Foraging for things. A lot of times it's things that are under the dirt. And what do? They take those things and they take them somewhere. And they do this every day. And they look super healthy. And I see little squirrels, young squirrels who were just born not too long ago, getting out there doing the same thing. Why wouldn't you think as, for lack of a better term, a human, you would do the same thing? Well, you did at one point. But because there are disgusting, wicked demons out here, and the word demon, I mean all this, I don't like the fairy tale stuff, these names people give other people, but these disgusting human beings who are miserable and are so used to a culture of death that they want you to be miserable as well. But as you can see from these newspaper articles, your people, they were doing what beings do. Doing what came natural. This is from the Birmingham Post-Herald newspaper, Birmingham, Alabama, Thursday, June 2nd, 1921. 10 blocks of homes burn in Tulsa, Negro quarters. Militiamen are on guard. The Salisbury Post newspaper, Salisbury, North Carolina, Tuesday, December 23rd, 1924. Bad Negro dead. Hamlet, December 23rd. Bud Davis, Negro, who for years has been known as a disturber in this district, is dead. And George Brights, another Negro, is in jail at Bennettsville as a result of shooting at John Huckabee's store 4 miles south of here. See? Niggas was popping them things even at that time, man. Told you want to know about what's happening today? Look at yesterday. You want to know what happened yesterday? Look at today. Battle Creek Moon Journal newspaper, Battle Creek, Michigan. We in Michigan now. Tuesday, December 30th, 1924. Negro Indian gave U.S. much. Researcher speaker says black and red men helped us. We know what red men are. Think of red in reference to a human. You don't think of the color red like if you go to a store and get a red t-shirt or a red Bulls cap or something like that. No. You think of red in reference to a human. We're thinking of, like, for example, the crayon Indian red, which is now called chestnut. Copper-colored race left rich traditions, invaluable anthropological data. The St. Louis Argus newspaper, St. Louis, Missouri, Friday, August 22nd, 1924. Well, this one says woman kills white man, surrenders, and placed in a Mississippi jail, I presume. So a sister killed a white boy and they put him on the Mississippi jail. This lady right here is Madam Rhoda. Say she leaves for Macon. Let's see if I can see this. Madam R. Page Rhoda, formerly of this city, but now of 130 of 130 West 139th Street, New York City, after attending the hairdressers convention, leaves for Fulton, Kentucky to attend the International Convention of Evangelistic Workers, of which she is supervisor. Very interesting. 1924. 360 days, 365 days in a year, right? A lot happening. The Kansas City Sun newspaper, Kansas City, Missouri, Saturday, January 5th, 1924. The Kansas City Sun, it says, oil grabbers fail in Kansas. It says, Negro made chief at Tuskegee Hospital. 1924. This ain't no Kunta Kinte stuff right here, man. New Pittsburgh Courier newspaper, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, Saturday, July 19th, 1924. The world, not the United States. Someone writing for the New York World is trying to mold sentiment without any facts to support the contention. The Courier does not worry about the influence the world wields over the average American voter. But when false inferences are made without any foundation of fact, we cannot remain silent. The world is not the United States by any means. The Tuskegee Hospital mess is familiar to almost every Negro in the United States. Everyone knows President Harding promised a Negro personnel. We all know that Henry Lincoln Johnson and Dr. R.R. Motten exchanged wits and political influences, which disclosed Motten as man mixing in where he was not expected, and lying, Johnson playing his usual political tricks for personal popularity. But we had hoped all that was behind us. But now comes the world with an article written on the hospital, but intended to stir political curiosity and tell us by inference that the recent change of personnel at Tuskegee is a move on the part of President Coolidge to stay the trend away from President Coolidge to Lafayette. We agree that this kind of publicity is habitual with the world. But we do not agree that any Negro in these United States are favorably impressed with any white newspaper report as to what Negroes will do under a given set of circumstances. A white newspaper may guess what a few whites may do under a given set of circumstances, but the same newspaper can never guess what Negroes will do. Negroes happen to have their own methods of determining what they will do under any given set of circumstances. Tuskegee is in the hands of a Negro personnel. This is simply what the original plan contemplated. Mr. Harding was timid about doing the Calvin Coolidge simply ordered done. The same Hines that made the change last week is the same Hines that could and would have made the same change last year if Mr. Harding had ordered it done. As to La Follette and the recommendations of the NAACP, the Courier agrees with the other informed Negroes who cannot appreciate how the NAACP happens to assume the role of political counsel without either let or license from the Negroes of the country. Fifth Avenue, New York is a nice tower of safety on which to sit and cast advice into the Ku Klux districts where the officers of the NAACP prefer not to live and labor for the advancement of the race. Sheesh. This is the New Pittsburgh Courier newspaper, Saturday, July 19th, 1924. This is what your people doing in 1924. The Buffalo American newspaper, Buffalo, New York, Thursday, February 14th, 1924. Prominent Negro addresses Mississippi legislature. Chicago Tribune newspaper, Chicago, Illinois, Sunday, August 24th, 1924. Flood of Negro workers flows into Chicago. Predict 250,000 living here in 1930. Times Record News newspaper, Wichita Falls, Texas, Thursday, December 4th, 1924. Negro cop silences UDC row. Negro cop, 1924. El Paso Times newspaper, El Paso, Texas, Wednesday, November 12th, 1924. Farmer shoots and kills Negro employee. Farmer shoots and kills Negro employee. What was that nigga doing? Or did the farmer not want to pay him? Or said he couldn't pay him? Asked him, could he wait another week? Or asked him if he can buy him dinner instead of give him a pair of pants. Victoria Advocate newspaper, Victoria, Texas, Wednesday, February 27, 1924. Negro bandit kills white man when he tries to rob mill. London, Texas, February 27. Andy Sulzer, 50-year-old, was killed by a Negro bandit who attempted to rob the Wright Lumber Company's mill during the night. Sulzer was manager of the commissary of the company. He was locking up when the Negro approached and demanded the receipts. He demanded the receipts, man. Prove yourself, man. Sulzer resisted, and the Negro fired, fleeing without any loot. It say posses are searching for the black. The Bradenton Herald, Bradenton, Florida newspaper, Monday, December 1st, 1924. Negro kills white man by a blow on the head. Valdosta, Georgia, December 1st. J. Lewis Wynn, 50, farmer and merchant, died in the hospital today from the effects of a blow on the head inflicted Sunday by a Negro, Lawson Zipperer. The blow is said to have followed a quarrel over an account. Zipperer has been arrested and placed in jail. The News Star, Monroe, Louisiana newspaper, Friday, February 8th, 1924. Negro kills white man after latter beats mother and sister. The Olympian newspaper, Olympia, Washington, Tuesday, November 11th, 1924. Fear race riot if sections of Kentucky. State troops rush to construction camps after Negro kills white. Harrodsburg, Kentucky, November 10th. Armed white workmen drove out approximately 500 Negroes from the construction camp of the Dix River Dam 8 miles from here last night after Edward Winkley, 18, a bridegroom of only a few days, had been fatally shot by a Negro highwayman. It's a Saskatoon Daily Star newspaper, Saskatoon, Saskatchewan, Canada. Saturday, March 29th, 1924. Negro kills white woman. Saskatchewan, Canada. Negro kills white woman. All available police in St. Paul hunt colored slayer. Buffalo Courier Express newspaper, Buffalo, New York, Sunday, June 1st, 1924. Long Island nearly has race riot after Negro kills white. Victim meets death rescuing 3 women from dope-crazed Negro. 1924, dope-crazed Negro in Long Island. I should I read that one? Dope crazy Negro said all. The Daily Independent, Maysville, Kentucky, Tuesday, July 15th, 1924. The Daily Independent, Maysville, Kentucky newspaper. Negro kills white man in dice game. Elizabethtown, Kentucky. A large amount of family members on my maternal side are from Kentucky. Elizabethtown, they worked on the railroads, and also they were blacksmiths. Elizabethtown, Kentucky, July 4th. Rance Mannion, 33 years old, of Nolan, Kentucky, was stabbed to death and his throat cut at 2 o'clock Sunday morning by a Negro, alleged by witnesses to be Ray Hedspeth, during a dice game in the schoolhouse near Nolan. Henry Richardson, companion of the slain man, and 3 Negroes were in the game after being placed in the county jail, admitted this afternoon that Hedspeth had killed Mannion when an argument arose over a shot that was said to be cooked, or that was said to be cocked. The Negroes are Jesse Tinker, Emerson Robertson, and Elmer Hughes. The game followed a Negro festival, which was over at midnight Saturday. Mannion and Richardson are said to have been the only white men present. Richardson and the Negroes who were in the game admitted that the men had been drinking. Those arrested at first denied any knowledge of the stabbing. Mannion, who was married to the daughter of Samuel Vinson, a man of prominence at Nolan, had 5 children. Yeah, 1924 Racial Integrity Act. Racial Integrity Act going on in the with the vital statistics, National Archives type and look what else is happening. Let's shake it. The Knoxville Journal and Tribune newspaper, Knoxville, Tennessee, Monday, November 17th, 1924. Mississippi Negro kills white youth, another badly hurt. Holly Bluff, Mississippi, November 16th. Clifford Hart, son of Edward Hart, supervisor of Yazoo County, was shot to death by a Negro at the door of his father's store near Yazoo City late today. Claude Carroll, companion of young Hart, was seriously wounded by the Negro, for whom posses are searching tonight. An automobile in which Hart and Carroll were riding this afternoon is said to have collided with one driven by the Negro. The youth returned to Edward Hart's store, and shortly afterwards, the Negro, whose name could not be learned here, drove up and asked for some gasoline. Young Hart went to the door, and the Negro opened fire, shooting the youth 5 times and killing him instantly. Carroll was shot twice. A posse of Holly Bluff citizens had failed to capture the Negro late tonight. Wow. He had an accident with him in his car. The nigga followed him, went and asked him for gas, popped him, and then popped his homie. Yikes. The Elba Clipper newspaper, Elba, Alabama, Thursday, September 18th, 1924. Demopolis Negro kills white man. The Birmingham Reporter newspaper, Birmingham, Alabama, Saturday, October 25th, 1924. E.W. Roughton crosses over. Great crowd attend funeral. White friends pay tribute. The St. Louis Argus newspaper, St. Louis, Missouri, Friday, August 22nd, 1924. It says, the National Negro Insurance Association also meets at Chicago. Okay. Hey. The St. Louis Argus newspaper, St. Louis, Missouri, Friday, August 22nd, 1924. The Negro vote and the Klan. A vote is the highest expression of citizenship. See? Please understand this. You listening for today. Understand this. The Negro vote and the Klan. A vote is the highest expression of citizenship. If you don't vote, they got to go. Okay? I know it's impossible that we all agree to not, so that they can get out the right. You know? A vote is the highest expression of citizenship. It is to be used wisely and at no time thoughtlessly. They're telling you how it should be used. They're telling you the importance of it. They're giving you the thought that it's important. They're hoping to make it important to you. And guess what? Is it? It should be used as a weapon of offense and defense. We must use it to defend our rights as citizens the best we can under all circumstances. The Ku Klux Klan is an enemy to the colored people of this country. One of its purposes is to take the ballot from the Negro. The Klan knows that to take the ballot from the people in a country like this will leave the victims in a worse state than chattel slavery itself. So it is our duty, a duty we owe ourselves and to our posterity, to open the Klan in every way possible at every point, to oppose the Klan in every way possible at every point of contact with every inch of our strength. Sympathizers and propagandists of the Ku Klux Klan tell us to let them alone, saying it will soon die. Such talk is pure Klan boosting propaganda. While you sleep, they work in the most subtle way. To believe such stuff is the most dangerous thing to the peace and happiness of not only the Negro, Jew, and Catholic, but to the entire nation. Everybody knows that the Klan is a lawless body and is opposed to the regular constituted authorities of the law. Therefore, we do not see why any person who claims to be in favor of law and order is afraid of the KKK. Any man or woman who seeks public office where the fulfillment of that office is based upon the Constitution of the United States and at the same time is afraid to renounce or denounce the Ku Klux Klan certainly forfeits the rights of confidence from a large element of citizens and is not a safe official to trust when the rights of all the people are to be respected. The Broad Axe newspaper, Salt Lake City, Utah, Saturday, November 15th, 1924. Democrats rob Negro farmers in the South. Democrats rob Negro farmers in the South. Remember, Negro equals American. The American that was here before foreigners ever came here, before they ever approached the shores or landed from their outer space. Let's shake it. The Birmingham Reporter newspaper, Birmingham, Alabama, Saturday, September 27, 1924. White boy confesses. Italian shoots Negro. Trouble threatened. This is from the Birmingham Reporter newspaper, Birmingham, Alabama, Saturday, September 27, 1924. The Birmingham Reporter, white boy confesses crime. Italian shoots Negro. Trouble threatened. The Buffalo American, Buffalo, New York newspaper, Thursday, January 3rd, 1924. Status of Negro in the Reconstructed World. The Buffalo American, Buffalo, New York newspaper, Thursday, January 3rd, 1924. Status of Negro in the Reconstructed World. Again, I'm pretty sure that's a great article. What is this? This is a Chattanooga Daily Times. Let me see what this says. No Negro domination. You know, if at this point, if there's any question at this point about what Nicholas was doing in 1924. It should be very clear. The same thing we're doing today. Whatever we want to do. The Birmingham Post newspaper, Birmingham, Alabama, Wednesday, May 28th, 1924. Negro woman to hang. 4 others may also die. Wonder what she did. Or didn't do. The St. Louis Argus newspaper, St. Louis, Missouri. Friday, August 22nd, 1924. It says, text of Dr. Robert R. Moton's address to Business League, delivered at 25th Annual Convention in Chicago. This brother gonna give a text address to business, delivered. It says the text of Dr. Robert R. Moton's, Dr. Robert R. Moton, 1924, delivered at the 25th Annual Convention in Chicago. The Daily Worker newspaper, Chicago, Illinois, Tuesday, March 25th, 1924. Negro unionist protest black capitalist plot. How many of y'all protest? How many niggas today unionists protesting black capitalist plot? I'd like to know a little bit more about that. The Black Dispatch newspaper, Oklahoma City, Oklahoma, Thursday, February 28th, 1924. It says, should we control our schools? That should be obvious. Who else you gonna get to control them? Especially when educate is synonymous with nurture and nourish. Who you want nurturing and nourishing your kids? They mama should be. The Daily Worker newspaper, Chicago, Illinois, Monday, August 18th, 1924. Hurl indictment at huge Negro Congress in New York. 1924, huge Negro Congress in New York. I'm just saying, do you know who really run it? The Daily Worker newspaper, Chicago, Illinois, Thursday, August 14th, 1924. It says, Workers' Party calls for fight on Klan. It said, Negroes will challenge, is that California? Negroes will challenge on Klan issue. That seems interesting. Negro will challenge on Klan issue. The Daily Worker again, Chicago, Illinois newspaper, Tuesday, August 5th, 1924. Negroes asked to join labor's world struggle. Why would a nigga want to join a struggle? The Birmingham News newspaper, Birmingham, Alabama, Thursday, January 31st, 1924. $819,600 for Negro school work asked. The Commercial Appeal newspaper, Memphis, Tennessee, Tuesday, December 30th, 1924. Police records show year of achievement. Homicide list includes only 14 white persons. The Buffalo Times, Buffalo, New York newspaper, Monday, June 23rd, 1924, Negro lawyer dies. Augusta, Georgia, June 23rd, Judson W. Lyon, Negro attorney, registrar of the United States Treasury during the McKinley administration, died at his home here yesterday. 1924. The Commercial Appeal newspaper, Memphis, Tennessee, Wednesday, May 21st, 1924. Honor Negro, Mammy. Scores of white folks attend funeral of aged negress at Louisville. See, most of y'all see negress and negro and things of this nature, and you automatically get offended. You automatically say racism. See, that's because you strip your people of any power. Like, for instance, me saying nigger is because I don't think some Anglo came here not speaking English, not speaking American, learn the language, then all of a sudden they calling me something that I don't want to be called. No, that's not it. That's not it. You know why they called the woman a Negro and the man a Negress, or the woman a Negress and the man a Negro and such? And you know, when they said nigger, they said it because that's what we said to one another. Just like today. I mean, today you have every group of people calling one another niggers. And don't know nigger gotta be around. Why would they do that? Because who is the nigger? The American. OED, Oxford English Dictionary Online, the subscription version says the nigger is the American Indian. Why would they want to be calling themselves the American Indian? Because he's cool. She's cool. Scores of white folks attend funeral of aged negress at Louisville. Louisville, Kentucky. Wow, Louisville. I got some interesting family members from Louisville. May 20th, scores of white folks, many of whom she had loved and served, attended the funeral at Pee Wee Valley today of Lucinda, Aunt Lou Adams, a typical old Southern mammy who for more than 3/4 of a century had lived in the little village which today pays its final respects to her. Aunt Lou was believed to be 100 years old. Drum roll, do the drum roll. Here we go. Born a slave. All that means is that this means that they could have easily substituted the word slave for dependent. Born a dependent, as does all babies. She was obtained by Justice Benjamin Estelle of the Supreme Court of Virginia and remained in his family long after the Civil War. She was obtained. You see the words they use? It's not that they use these words because they're trying to be disrespectful. These are the only words that they know. It's not like it's not like American English is these people's first language. I guess I'm just speaking with the thought of people getting offended and immediately thinking, oh, they were so racist. See what the newspaper headlines say? Honor Negro Mammy. She was obtained by Justice Benjamin Estelle of the Supreme Court of Virginia. She worked for them. worked for him, and remained in his family long after the Civil War. She died Sunday at the home of Powhatan Woodridge Jr., where she had lived several years. She died at the home of Powhatan. Telegraph Journal newspaper, St. John, New Brunswick, Canada. St. John, New Brunswick, Canada newspaper, Thursday, October 30th, 1924. Kentucky Negro lynched by mob. This is the first of its kind. Although them other niggas, when they did some dirt, they said posses was looking for them. Was looking for them. Some people, I'm pretty sure, might say that see, posses was looking for them. The Klan was looking. Man, you had a posse. We all had a posse once. We had a posse, a clique, a mob, a gang. A gang. Prestonburg, Kentucky, October 29th. Kid Shannon, Negro, 28, was shot 18 times by a mob estimated at 200 men. Gee. Whew. Sunday night at Wayland and died from his wounds. He was charged with having killed a white man. 15 men were guarding the jail at the time the Negro was seized. The Dispatch newspaper, Moline, Illinois, Thursday, June 19th, 1924. Pioneer Negro woman dies in East Moline, in Illinois. East Moline, June 19th. What y'all call today is Juneteenth, right? East Moline, June 19th. Miss Eliza Lewis, colored, resident of East Moline for more than 26 years, died at her residence. They say she was a pioneer. 1246 18th Avenue at her residence. If the newspaper clipping go long enough, they're gonna say she was born a slave. But she's at her residence, 1246 18th Avenue, East Moline, at 8 this morning. She was 70 years of age, born in Bloomsfield, Kentucky. In March 1854, surviving to mourn are a son, Harry, and a sister, Miss Carrie Lane of East Moline. Telegraph Journal newspaper, St. John, New Brunswick, Canada, Monday, July 28th, 1924. Negro boxer dead. Utica, New York, July 27th. Amos Lavander, age 64, better known to the sporting world of 20 years ago as Thunderbolt Smith, one of the foremost Negro boxers of his day, died here today after 2 months' illness. At 19, he began a boxing career in which he fought 225 battles, many of them with his bare knuckles, and toured America and Europe as the protege of William Muldoon. His last big fight was with Jack Johnson at Minneapolis in 1908. This is a sister in 1924. Photography. This is a sister in 1924. Again, we're in 1924. We're in the 1920s. Around that time, we did the sidebar, the long version sidebar. 1924. Yeah. Ain't nobody running. Don't you know who run it? Yeah. 1924. Yeah. 1924. 1924. Oh. Mm, yeah, for sure. Let's go back to where we were. Let's go back to NAGA. NAGA. Mulattoes and the American Indian. NAGA, where we started from. Whereas a tiny but vocal group of non Indian elite educators and Indian activists are now using these false claims to censor opposing views, including American Indians. Truth is more vital today than ever before. With the fabricated and false definition of mulatto and others to mean black and white heritage, they use the new definition to attack and discredit American Indians. The biggest question becomes, why is the education system working so hard to eradicate the American Indian? Do the right thing.